Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of the Dr. Will Show, where I interview educators and entrepreneurs on leveling up. Each episode, I zoom in someone who's dope, and we just sit back and have a conversation on what it means to live your best life. Now, this is your first time checking out the podcast. This is the Mobile University for Entrepreneurs, and I'm your host, Dr. Will. Coming back on the show is Mandy Froehlich. We're going to be talking about her new book. We're going to also get into questions about, like, how does she know she was an author, and get some tips for those who may be thinking about, that's something they want to do. It's not in me. It's not in me. That's why I made a documentary. But Mandy is just on it. I was going through it. I said, "Ooh, man, she's been busy writing these books for EduMatch." So for those who'll be listening on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Simplecast, Stitcher, and Spotify, will you please introduce yourself, Mandy?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me back. I was so excited about being on today. So my name, again, is Mandy Froehlich. I have been in education for quite a few years and started out as an elementary educator. And then I was a tech integrator, a director of innovation and technology. And then I recently retired from that, and now I consult full time. And so I retired just in time for the pandemic. I was like, oh, I can foresee a pandemic coming. I should retire now. No, not really, but I did do it just in time. And so I do have, like you mentioned, I have a few books out there. Kind of my jam is educator mental health. That's supporting teachers, and that is what makes me happy. And then my second book is also about innovation. And so those are kind of the areas that I stick my nose into and where I feel most comfortable. So.
All right. So I'm always interested in, how did people, what did you think you would be doing when you were growing up? And how did you actually find yourself in education?
Yeah, so I really always want this story to be the one where, I say something like, oh, I had desks when I was younger and I'd put my little, dolls in the desks and teach them. That is not my story at all. I want that story, but that's not mine. So I actually went to school to be a lawyer. I wanted to go into corporate law. That's what I had wanted to be since I was about 8 years old. And my first year in college, I really struggled quite a bit with depression and anxiety and things like that. And I did fine with my grades, but my passion for really figuring out law school and things like that just went to the wayside. And I think in my freshman year, I met my husband and I got married very young. And I had relatives at the time that were lawyers and who seemed to have very little time for their families. And I didn't want that. And so I really felt in a lot of ways I chose to do what was best for my family at the time versus going into law. And so I started to work with my own kids and was kind of working on my general education. It took me a really long time to get my bachelor's degree because I worked on it through having 4 kids. And at one point I was teaching my son and he was learning, and I was like, oh, I could do this. I love this. And so then I finished up in my education degree, and I really think not everybody has that path of wanting to do it since they were 3 years old, but it doesn't make it less that I belong here. And so I've, loved being in education ever since.
So when did you know being an author was something that you had that in you, right? It's one thing for someone, I guess, to say, I would like to write a book. There's another thing to actually sit down and get it done. Because I have stared at many of a Google Doc and I was like, nah, this is not going to happen.
Yeah, so as far as being an author goes, I want that story where when I was 3 years old, I wanted to be an author. But that's not the case either. I never intended on writing a book, ever. That was never something that I wanted to do. I was dying to do. What ended up happening is it was just something I had to do. And the reason it came about was because I had developed this hierarchy of needs for innovation and divergent thinking, which is what my second book is on. And I released it in a blog post and kind of released the image, and it just went around like wildfire. And a school district in Brazil contacted me, and they said, we want to use what you have written here as a way that we are developing our professional development for the next 3 years. And they said, and this is how we're going to do it. And it was all wrong. So the hierarchy was really developed as a way to support teachers and how can we best support teachers. And they were very much using it as a way to instill compliance. And at that point, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this is not at all how I intended this, and did not ever want anyone to think I intended it that way. And so I started writing Divergent EDU in order to really fix that, to really say, no, this is what I mean. And when you look at it, this is what I want you to see. And I guess in a business sense, it was a way of controlling my brand. I wanted to make sure that the way I wanted to be perceived was actually how I was being perceived. And I actually wrote Divergent EDU and The Fire Within at the same time. And so they were released very quickly, one right after one another, because I was kind of going back and forth between writing them. I'd write on Divergent EDU until I got sick of it, and then I would move over to Fire Within and work on that a little bit, and kind of went back and forth. But that's sort of how I got started into writing the books, was really out of necessity, to be honest.
So your latest book, Reignite The Flames, where did the inspiration come from?
I think Reignite the Flames came from, I really ended up in this space several years ago, right before I released Fire Within, where I started talking about mental health and mental health issues in a very intentional, but probably more blatant way than most people were talking about it. And I took a lot of heat at first, because this was, 4 years ago already, about 4 years ago, and I really started talking about it. And I made people super uncomfortable with talking about teachers who would have depression and teachers who would have anxiety. And what do you mean kids, people who teach our children would have mental health issues, this kind of attitude. And I was told, you're going to get people fired. You're going to get fired. Like, nobody should be talking about this. And the more people told me that, the more angry I got about the fact that, sports players who were getting paid millions of dollars could say, oh, I had this horrible childhood and I ended up with these mental health issues. And the public would say, oh, that's that's amazing that you made it through that. And it's great that you say that out loud. And yet teachers who were making, minimal amounts of money weren't able to talk about the same things. And that was sort of the catalyst for The Fire Within. And Reignite the Flames is a follow-up to that, and being just very open and honest about what mental health and mental health issues looks like with educators. and what engagement and disengagement is, and some ideas for coming back from that if you happen to find yourself disengaged. And so I really wanted to apply research to my claims in The Fire Within. And so that's sort of how they're linked.
Since writing those two books and you being, writing and being on Twitter and speaking and presenting, what have you been seeing from other teachers or hearing from other teachers at schools that let you know that you are headed in the right direction?
That's a great question. So I think I can probably give, I could give lots of specific examples, but one in particular was a teacher I was working with just before the pandemic, and I was brought into the district to provide like coaching, to like innovative coaching to the teachers. And I've heard for years teachers open up to me, and I'm sure lots of other people have experienced or heard it, where they're like, I'm so stressed, I don't know what's going on, the teachers mandated this curriculum, I absolutely hate it, I don't know how to teach it, they're not giving us enough support, all of these things. And I've been in teachers' classrooms, everything from them to being angry and crying to just kind of numb and listless. And everybody's been talking about mental health issues of teachers since the pandemic started, but this has been an issue for a very long time. The pandemic has just highlighted the issue. One time I was in a classroom and I'm working with this teacher, and just phenomenal teacher. And she was talking about how she used to have this passion and drive for education and how she just didn't have it anymore. And she kept saying, I'm burnt out, I'm burnt out, I'm burnt out. And I said, I don't know if you're burnt out. I said, I actually think that you may be demoralized. And the reason I said that was because she kept saying, this piece of why I'm an amazing teacher, of what makes me passionate and what I love, has been squashed by this mandated curriculum that we have. And I can't do, this part of what I'm passionate about and make it work with the mandated curriculum. And I said, that's not burnout, that's demoralization. I said, so let's talk about how you can sort of fight, quote unquote, demoralization. Because right now you're trying to fight burnout, and that's different. That's a different way of coming back from that. And so we went through, as kind of like a side thing from what else we were supposed to be doing with the innovation stuff, we went through some exercises that she could do. And by the end of it, she really had figured out how she could mesh her passion with the curriculum and really dialed into who she was as an educator. And I saw the metamorphosis from when we first talked to, when our time had ended, and she was feeling better. And that's really why I wrote the books that I did. I want people to know that there are so many different reasons why you can feel disengaged. It's not just burnout. And if we can target those reasons, we may be able to save your connection. We save the connection to the education field that you feel like you're missing. And so that's how I feel like I'm on the right track, because of situations like that. And they're everywhere, to be honest.
I went through something of my own experience several years ago, and I was just ready to quit, but I got a mortgage. So I was like, I gotta keep going. and oh my gosh, Lavonna Roth, thank you, reached out to me and we had a conversation, because I was just at my wit's end of being, working in a one-to-one environment, and me sort of feeling like I'm pushing and dragging and beating people over the head of, we need to be different. We need to do differently. And guess what? Over the horizon, everything's going to change. Now, I didn't see a pandemic, but I knew from looking at the disruption of technology under other industries, I knew something was coming. Mm-hmm. And I just felt like, you know, when people are like, I don't want to use it, I don't want to be bothered, you know, I'm like, okay, because I love this, like, just like this is my jam right here. And I was just ready to be out. And, you know, we had a conversation, and then I kind of stepped back. And the first thing I said was, if they didn't want to work with me, I wasn't going to even bother with it. Like, I wasn't going to even bring that anxiety into my life in terms of trying to talk them into something. If they want to be bothered, I'm out. I'm going to the people who are like, Will, let's do this. I want to do this. Hey, how can I do this? And then things started to kind of get better for me at that point, because I was at a point, I was like, people are getting on my nerves.
Yeah. And you know, I think that the whole demoralization thing. So like, demoralization is really when there is something stopping you from feeling like you're doing your best job. Like, teachers get into education with a moral obligation to do better, right? And to make a difference. And so anytime you feel like something is stopping you from doing your job, pandemics, for example, that can cause demoralization. And I think that there's a really high incidence of instructional coaches having demoralization for that exact example that you just gave. Sort of the stuff that I write about, what comes out of that is you have a teacher who is, you know, for whatever reason, disengaged. Maybe it's that they are dealing with an aging parent that they're taking care of every single night, and they don't have the energy to put into education. Maybe it's that they're totally burnt out. Maybe it's that they're demoralized. Maybe they're suffering from a teacher trauma. Like, it could be many different reasons, but they're disengaged. That disengagement, or the mental health issue, or whatever it is going to be a barrier to thinking innovatively. So a lot of times, as instructional coaches, or even as leadership, we're saying, how can we make these teachers be innovative? But it's kind of like Maslow's. It's like, if you're not going to deal with the underlying cause of what's going on there, they're never going to get to be, they don't have the mental capacity to try to be innovative. And like with an instructional coach, then on the other side, you're saying, well, my job is to help you be innovative, and you're disengaged and don't have the capacity to be innovative. I can't help you be innovative and that's part of my job. And so then it's kind of like it just trickles down to other staff members, because nobody feels like they can do their job. And so, you know, and I think you choosing to, at the time, choosing to work with the people who want to work with you, like, that is one way. It's almost like a defense mechanism for you to stay engaged, because if you don't do something that keeps you engaged, you are also going to disengage and, you know, not be doing your best job either. And so that's where I see a lot of issues in education, is really starting at kind of that root level of disengagement.
So let's touch on burnout in terms of teachers. Teaching has changed a lot from, let's say, 30 years ago, because now teachers are no longer, and you've all heard it, you're no longer there just to teach the curriculum. You are there and you're dealing with kids who may be homeless, or kids who may be being abused at home, or kids coming in with, you know, behavior where you literally want to shake that child, like when you shake change out of their pants because you just driving you crazy. You could be dealing with parents who, instead of them being an ally and helping you, they're pushing back. And then you have administrators that if you say, you know, Johnny, go to the office, the administrator doesn't deal with Johnny, the administrator sends Johnny right back. Now, you already here. And now you're like, I know this mother did not send this child back. So this is just your job. This is not accounting for what may be happening at home. What are teachers to do when they feel like everything is caving in on them and they don't have the power, right, to make anything go away? And they're at a point of, I need to just step away. Like, the teaching thing has to go. I'll go sell insurance. I'll go be a Walmart greeter, but I'm not going back to this.
Well, I think that sometimes there are times where it's appropriate for you to step away. I heard a speaker say one time, if you don't want to be in education, don't leave. We don't want you here. And I don't believe that. I want you here. Like, I want people get into education for a reason. It's not for the money. It's not for, they get in to make a difference. We want those people here. And we, and I mean, kind of, when I say we, I mean kind of the education profession in general, we have to take some responsibility for some of the things that are going on in our teachers' professional lives. Like, there are some things as an education profession we do have control over. Easy access to mental health services, for example, the ability to cultivate a healthy culture in the school, policies that support teachers and students so that if there is a behavior issue, that it's dealt with. And if the teacher is up to their eyeballs and I can't take it anymore, that they are given time to come down from that prior to the student being sent back. We really do expect kind of these superhuman behaviors out of teachers, which is super unfair. And it's not honestly only teachers. It's also the instructional coaches, and it's also the leadership. In a lot of cases, I see really good leaders being burnt out too. To be honest, it's usually the good ones that are burnt out, right? Because they're trying so hard to create change. And so in some cases, taking a step away might be the choice that needs to be taken. But if you're not to that point yet, a lot of stuff that I would say is the stuff that you're probably hearing all the time. It is starting to make some very intentional, purposeful decisions about how you spend your time. And one thing I've said with this pandemic in particular is creating boundaries. You don't work after your contracted time, or if you do, it's no more than you did as a teacher in the classroom. Of course there were nights sometimes that I had to take home a ton of grading because I didn't get it done during the day. And for those nights, I obviously worked a full day and then worked at night. But I've heard teachers saying, I'm working 12, 15, 18 hours a day. No, just because you are available online doesn't mean you should be available online. And there is nothing that kid is going to ask you at 5 o'clock at night that cannot be answered the next day. If they were in a brick and mortar setting, your students wouldn't be texting you questions or emailing you questions at 5 o'clock at night and expecting an answer. Like, that's not how it works. And a lot of times, when I say that, people say, well, that's just not possible. And I think, and I don't want to make it sound like this is so easy, because it's not. It takes a lot of really intentional decisions, a lot of, kind of looking at the work you're giving and how much of it is busy work. Nobody was really taught how to teach online. And a lot of districts that I work with spent a lot more time figuring out the logistics of the next year instead of providing professional development and true online learning for their teachers. So teachers don't know that you don't have to give 3 worksheet assignments a day, and teachers don't know that if there's project-based stuff is still very, very appropriate. And so these are some of the issues that I'm seeing, is just almost like an inappropriate, application of what online learning is expected to look like. And I'm talking about by administration and some of the decisions that they made that teachers are supposed to be doing. And then a lack of professional development that was provided to the teachers, so they're not working 15 hours a day, because that's unreasonable. And so really creating those boundaries, understanding that pandemics are temporary and online learning was never meant for the masses. We're in a very strange emergency situation. Do the best that you can, and so a lot of these things, the mindfulness, the meditation, the self-care, those would all be things that I would say, because they're all super important and need to be done. And they really are the way you're going to keep yourself the best so that you can be the best for your students.
Ooh, ooh. Look, this whole summer, I was just getting ticked off every time I got on Twitter, just reading some of these people's tweets, because if you're a principal, you're a superintendent, you've done this thing a couple of years, 3 years, 4 years, 10 years, whatever, you know what opening a regular school year looks like. Mm-hmm. You had between March and June at some point to say, we need to come out with a real online plan. And most did not, because most in their minds were thinking, we're all going back to school. Instead of them saying, we're all planning to be online and we're going to bring in people to teach best practices for teaching online. And if we have a green light of we can go back, we already have the experience to get that plan rolling. We already know what we're doing in that way. Mm-hmm. But they didn't. And all of a sudden, when they had to go back virtual or they had to go back hybrid, now it's the same fumbling around that they were doing 4 months, 5 months prior. And I was
back in March, yep.
And I was just going like, what are you people, like, what are you doing? Like, are you, mm-hmm. like, do you not see that you are setting your entire school year up? Even if you said we're going to do this for the first semester, you're setting it right up for failure. Your school leadership and your teachers, because you failed to understand what this thing really needs to look like. So I was on Twitter. I apologize if I offended anybody, but I was just really at that point of like, you people are driving me crazy because you're not planning.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. And there's this kind of fine line between, I understand that everybody's doing the best they possibly can at every given moment. Even, I was an administrator, so I get that. Like, there are things that you have to take care of, stuff that you have going on in a day that nobody else understands or knows about. And they're not supposed to, because it's not their job. So I totally get that part. But the reality of what happened is we had a lot of people making decisions about things they themselves never knew about. And so, unless you were a district that had a really robust online best practices program that you had built from the ground up, and you understood online best practices and you were involved in that process, unless you had that, you were making decisions on things that you probably never paid attention to because you weren't doing them. And so I said that to somebody at one point, and they said, what do you mean there's administrators out there that don't know about online learning? And I said, there are people who never taught online, who never built an online program. I worked with a district where their teachers had a learning management system that they were using, and the principals didn't know how to get on Zoom or use the learning management program because they were just busy doing the other things. And so they couldn't even help them if they had questions because the teachers had to dive in, but the administrators were making the other decisions for the following year. And so there's a huge disconnect between the people who had to make the logistical decisions. And I also don't want to offend any administrators because I go back to the fact that everybody's doing the best that they can. And this is an emergency situation and not the norm and things like that. But I also agree with you that in many cases, people are doing the same thing, if not worse, than what they were doing in March. And we had time to prepare. And, the most stressed out teachers I see are the ones who are teaching in the hybrid model, where they have a class of students in front of them and they have a class of students online, because it is very much like having two classes at once. And nobody really prepared for that, besides trying to figure out if a Mac would actually be able to pick up the teacher's voice and record the board at the same time. There was no pedagogical information given with that kind of hybrid model. And so, there were things that we could have done to prepare a little better, I think, in many cases. And right now we're seeing the fallout of that with teacher and student mental health. And I'm not sure at this point what we can do about it besides just ride it out.
We did a better job at that. So we did. And our superintendent made the investment in technology that allows for a really good synchronous learning experience between those at home and here. And that's what I've been doing. As I say, I'm in these HPSD streets in these schools, because I was like, I didn't want to. I was like, oh, but yeah, I've been working with teachers on how to actually use the Promethean panel, and then have the kids into that Zoom. And with that panel, the kids, when they share their screen, the kids at home and the kids at school, they're seeing the same thing at the same time. And then it's about teachers, how do you engage them so that you don't just pay attention to the ones in the classroom or the ones in that Zoom, but that you're actually going back and forth and making sure even the kids at Zoom, if you're saying, hey, what's the first step in working out this math problem, that the kids are talking and the kids at home can hear, the kids in the classroom can hear it. And now you're having this back and forth like you would. And so that's, been, what I'm doing. And so it's been exciting. And, I sat in one teacher's class last week, and I had such a great time. I stayed the whole class period. So I was like, you go ahead. So it was just, it was crazy and all that stuff. So I want to talk to you about sort of your writing process. Walk us through sort of your day to day, or how do you do it? Is it like I'm getting up at 6 a.m, or I just write when the inspiration hits me? How do you actually get a book written?
So I probably don't have a traditional kind of way to get started. I am a little bit about, I write when the inspiration hits me. And I think that might be a little bit because I'm not what I would call a natural writer. And people say, well, you write a blog and you've written books. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Writing's tough for me. It's hard for me to process my thoughts and get them into the words that I want to use and be very clear about what I'm saying. And so I always kind of say, you know, if anybody, like if I can write a book, anybody can write a book, because I'm not just one of those people that can sit down and write. And so I kind of do a few different things. Usually what happens is I think of a concept or a topic, and I'll kind of, I almost think of it like beta testing it. I'll put it out on a blog post and see how people respond to it, or how my thoughts actually work themselves out into a blog post. Or I'll create a conference presentation and I'll go and I'll do it at a conference, and I get such valuable feedback on my thinking when that happens. And I'm really I know myself well enough to know that I am a collaborative processor. I have to process my thoughts with somebody to get the best results. And so because of that, my writing is really sometimes based in conversations that I have, or just processing out loud, or again, the conferences or the blog posts or whatever it is. And then I take all of that and I put it into actual chapters in a book and expand on my thinking. And so I never had a structured get up at 6 o'clock, which I know that works for some people. I never had really a trick to what I was doing. I hit writer's block all the time and have to put things away and come back to it. And that's why, when I was writing the 2 books simultaneously, like that was almost better for me, because I could focus on one. And when I hit writer's block there, I could move back to the other one, and balance it out and get it done. So I don't know if I have any really good tactics, because I'm a little all over the place with it, to be honest. So.
Okay. So you're with EduMatch, and of course, you have your times 10 and Burgess and Corwin and Solution Tree, and you also have the option to self-publish. When the whole idea of I'm going to do this book, how did EduMatch come into the picture?
Sure. And I have to kind of preface this with now I actually work with Sarah Thomas and EduMatch. So at the time, I knew Sarah fairly well, had met her once, I think, at the time. And I submitted my books with a couple publishing companies, with the Fire Within I started out with. So the Fire Within I submitted to a couple publishing companies, and I got a lot of what I had said previous, where people were like, people don't want to read sad stories. They don't want to talk about educator mental health. Like, this is not a thing. We should not be putting this out there. And I was a little discouraged. And I had one publishing company who was kind of sitting on it, and they're like, well, we'll get back to you. And then I had also put it in with Sarah, and I met with Sarah, and Sarah said, yes, I want this. Like, I am all in. I love this book. I am 1,000% behind your ideas and your project. Like, and that's what I needed, especially with it, such an emotional book like that, and a very personal book, and just a personal project. I needed somebody to be all in. And for me, that was EduMatch and Sarah Thomas. Now, a lot of people ask me about publishers, and I always say, put your book in with everybody you can. Because you'll know the minute that you talk to that publishing company, if they're interested, it'll feel right. It'll be, like the first time that you ever stepped onto the college campus you went to, and you were like, yes, this is where I want to go. It's that same feeling. And so I personally think that EduMatch Publishing is my favorite, because it's the one that I work for and that published my books. But I really do say to put it in with everyone, because when you know, you'll know.
All right. So I got to ask you about the experience of going to a bookstore, going to the shelf, and you pull it out, you go, this is me. What is that
Yeah.
feeling like?
So the first time I went to Barnes and Noble and I saw it, I was all alone because I wasn't expecting it. It was there earlier than it was supposed to, but I happened to be on that side of town, um and it's so surreal. It's so surreal. And I not only had the one book, they had gotten both books in at once. And so it was from like going to nothing to having both Divergent EDU and The Fire Within on the shelf. And I remember I took a picture, like pointing to it on the shelf, and it was backwards because the image being like, so everything was backwards. But I was so excited I didn't notice, and I posted it. And someone said, "Oh, next time flip your camera around." And I was like, if you wrote a book and you found it in Barnes and Noble, you would understand. You don't think about flipping your camera around. It's just like, it's so surreal and crazy to see something like that. And well, I don't know if it's especially, but too, just with never wanting to write a book, like it was just, kind of that feeling of, where did this come from? Like, this was not something I ever expected in my life. So it was very cool. No words, really.
I hear you. I hear you. I just can imagine, like, what would that feel like? Because I would probably buy it and just go to the checkout counter and go, that's me.
Yeah.
It's me,
Right? Yeah.
because it would be like, oh my gosh, like, that's an experience to just go like, wow. Because even for me, when I had people tweet out pictures of the opening image of the documentary on their TV, I was kind of like, wow.
Yeah.
But I was like, wow. But I know that's still not going to the bookshelf in the store and pulling it
Yeah.
out.
That's still so amazing, though. And I think it goes for really any time that you put your heart and soul into a project, and it comes out in any sort of public way. At first, there's that, like, I remember the first time somebody tweeted out a picture of The Fire Within, and they're like, "I'm reading this right now," and I'm like, "Whoa, hang on now. People are gonna read it?" Like, I don't know why that hadn't dawned on me before. And all of a sudden I got so nervous, like, oh my gosh, somebody's gonna read this book? What? Um, but I think, like I said, and with your documentary, anytime you put so much of yourself into something like that, to see somebody else enjoying it or learning from it, it's such an amazing feeling.
Yes, it is. It is. So before we go, I got to ask you about the whole marketing aspect of the book, because I was interviewed and someone asked me about it, and I said, look, the easy part, honestly, is just getting it done. People may think that's the difficult part, but no, that's the easy part. I said, the hard part is when it's out and you're trying to get it into people's hands so they actually purchase it.
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned about marketing your book, as well as using that book as a way to garner speaking engagements and other opportunities?
Yeah, there was a friend of mine told me once that basically her book is really like her business card. She doesn't push her book very hard. She doesn't like that kind of thing, because it's really her way of getting speaking engagements, instead of selling the book. And I think that's, I honestly think that that's probably a good way to look at it. If you write a book in education thinking you're going to make $1 million, like, we're not Harry Potter. Like, they're never going to do that. They're never making movies unless they're a documentary out of our books. Like, that's just not how it works. And the marketing aspect is tough because teachers don't like to be self-promoters. They also don't like to follow self-promoters, and, that kind of idea of self-promotion. And so I've really found that the best way for me to market my work is to implement it in schools, like support them in any kind of implementation, or helping them work through some of their issues, or by going to conferences and presenting on the work. That has kind of been, for me, where I've seen the most interest sparked. Maybe not necessarily in my book, but in my work. And since they don't have direct contact with me, they pick up my book. And social media is great for getting the word out and stuff like that. But to be honest, there are so many books out there, and so many amazing authors, and so many concepts that are, becoming kind of your next big thing from month to month that people are gravitating towards. And so social media is great, but I found that the best way to market anything is just that personal touch, getting out there and talking to people, or doing podcast interviews where, I can actually say the things I want to say that don't fit in a tweet. So
awesome. Last question. What is the main thing you hope people take away from Reignite the Flames?
Oh, you ask such good questions. I think the main thing that I would like people to take away is to, I really want to be the vehicle for understanding how your emotions impact your day to day. And I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not a doctor, so I can't tell you, oh, you're doing X, so you must have, I can't do that. But what I can do is I can say, this is burnout, and here are the symptoms of burnout. Here are some things you might be doing if you're burnt out. And here, go ahead and talk to your doctor about it, because burnout is actually a medical diagnosis. Or, let's talk about teacher trauma, and what does teacher trauma constitute? It might mean, a student in your classroom passing away. It might be, in kind of an overzealous active intruder drill. In Wisconsin, we have active intruder drills where they shoot at teachers with airsoft guns. That could cause teacher trauma. And so it's really about talking about some of those pieces that people don't really talk about. And I want people to understand kind of that, that saying, it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to talk about it so that we can all be better. And so that's kind of what I would like people to take away from Reignite the Flames.
That's all right. Now, people, there's going to be a link in the show notes where you can go ahead and purchase your copy of Reignite the Flames. Do so, as well as links to her other books. Thank you, Mandy, for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Now, people, you know how I do this. This episode will be on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Simplecast, Stitcher, Spotify. I need you to leave your stars. They're great, but can I get some reviews? Can I get some comments? Because I'm trying to be found, and I'm trying to get Oprah on the show, and I want her to know that I'm doing big things around here. Again, I'd like to thank my guest, Mandy Froehlich, for coming on and dropping so many gems and just having a great conversation today. And again, I would like to thank you for checking out another episode of the Dr. Will Show, the mobile university for entrepreneurs. As always, people, invest in you. EDU. Peace.